Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating macro framework from legendary investor Ray Dalio. We are going to connect this massive, rapid-fire AI boom we're seeing right now to 500 years of historical economic cycles. Basically, we want to figure out exactly where we are in history at this very moment.
You know, Ray Dalio famously predicted the 2008 financial crash. So when he steps up and warns us about a potential AI bubble today, yeah, we should probably be paying attention. But to really answer that, we've got to look way past the flashy AI hype dominating the news and dig into the actual grounded economic mechanics underneath it all.
Here's our agenda for today. First, we'll look at the AI investment bubble. Second, the 80-year big cycle. Third, AI's impact on jobs. Fourth, preparing your portfolio. And finally, number 5, future-proofing your career. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The AI investment bubble and how excitement turns into a crash.
So what exactly is an economic bubble? Well, it happens when the price of a revolutionary new asset skyrockets, entirely driven by excitement and borrowed money. This causes investors to completely lose sight of the asset's actual underlying value. The absolutely crucial point here is that a bubble isn't about a new technology failing. I mean, AI is undeniably revolutionary, right? But a bubble is all about the financial mechanics, how people buy into it, especially when they start totally ignoring the price tags.
There's actually a classic 5-step domino effect that pops a bubble. It always starts with tremendous excitement, with people heavily borrowing money against their newfound paper wealth. But then, step 2 hits. Interest rates might rise to fight inflation. And that triggers step 3. Suddenly, investors desperately need hard cash to pay off those debts. That desperate scramble for cash leads right into step 4, a mass sell-off of those AI assets, which inevitably triggers step 5, the total market crash.
Dalio points out that the classic signs of a bubble appear when weak, unknowledgeable investors pour money into an asset using leverage, which basically means they're borrowing heavily just to make their bets. He notes that sure, AI is going to bring huge, revolutionary changes, absolutely, but this massive influx of uninformed, highly leveraged money, that is a huge historical red flag that we just might be in a bubble.
Moving right along to Section 2, the 80-year big cycle, zooming out on global economic history.
So what is the big cycle? It's a roughly 80-year macro pattern that involves the predictable collision of monetary debt cycles, internal political conflict, and changing external geopolitics. Dalio actually studied 500 years of history to identify this. He's showing us that an AI bubble bursting isn't an isolated event. It's really just one small cog in a much larger, highly predictable machine that repeats over and over throughout human history. Now, there are 3 main ingredients to this big cycle, and it is wild how perfectly they mirror our modern world. Ingredient 1, debt capacity is completely maxed out and money tightens up. Ingredient 2, large wealth gaps cause extreme internal political conflict. People are essentially at each other's throats. And ingredient 3, shifting geopolitics leads to a changing of the world order, like the shifts in trade dominance we're seeing between major powers like the US and China. According to these historical metrics, major Western powers are currently in the decline phase of this cycle, which is heavily marked by over-indebtedness and underproductivity. Look, it's absolutely vital to objectively look at these measurable markers, which point to a major restructuring of the global system, instead of just relying on daily news headlines to figure out what's actually going on in the world.
All right, Section 3, AI's impact on jobs and the evolution of human labor.
Think about this progression. In the agricultural age, humans essentially worked as oxen. Then came the industrial age, where tractors and factory machines started replacing our physical bodies. Now here we are in the AI age, and machines are beginning to replace the mind itself. This timeline paints a pretty stark evolutionary picture of technological progress, doesn't it? We're transitioning from replacing physical muscles to replacing cognitive and reasoning abilities.
Let's compare this directly. The Industrial Revolution replaced physical human necessities, the body, in factories. But the AI revolution is replacing higher levels of thinking and reasoning, the mind. The core analogy here really boils down to body versus mind. Meaning, if machines can successfully outthink us, the fundamental value of our labor drastically shifts in the marketplace.
And this dynamic creates a massive wealth gap. Right now, the top 10% of households own nearly 90% of the stock. Therefore, the capitalists who own the AI technology and the resulting productivity boom reap all the financial rewards. Meanwhile, the average worker whose labor is actively being replaced gets left far, far behind.
Naturally, these severe wealth gaps trigger intense political debates over solutions, like wealth taxes. Governments are forced into a really tough balancing act. They have to weigh the absolute need for public funding to establish a baseline standard of living against the high risk of capital flight, which is when wealthy individuals just pack up and move their money to lower tax regions. Dalio neutrally points out in his research that while the system absolutely must work for the majority to prevent severe internal conflict, implementing direct wealth taxes is operationally incredibly difficult and can simply push capital away.
Okay, Section 4, preparing your portfolio and defending against the cycle.
When defending against these cycles, you've got to remember that every single asset has risks. Cash might feel incredibly safe in the short term, sure, but it is guaranteed to lose to 3 to 4% inflation over the long haul. Stocks are productive, but they're highly volatile. They can literally drop 60 to 70% in a bust. Gold is private hard money that diversifies well. Bonds, well, you're essentially lending to the government, making them vulnerable to inflation and rising interest rates. And then there's Bitcoin. Digital hard money, but it carries its own risks with government regulation and even future quantum computers potentially cracking its encryption. So the main takeaway here is that sitting entirely in cash is a guaranteed loss to inflation. It is vital to thoroughly understand the pros and cons of these different asset classes.
Dalio suggests 3 core portfolio principles to actually survive this cycle. First, do not try to perfectly time the market. Even the pros can't do it reliably. Second, diversify. You want to reduce your risk without reducing your overall returns. And third, sit down and calculate exactly how many months you can survive without income, just to build a solid baseline of security. By spreading your investments out, you're protecting yourself against the massive drops that inevitably happen when these market bubbles finally pop.
And for a specific benchmark, Dalio personally recommends keeping roughly 5 to 15% of your portfolio in hard money, things like gold. This acts as a secure, private foundation that sits safely outside the standard financial system.
Finally, Section 5, future-proofing your career. Survival of the most adaptable. You know, history shows us over and over that it's not necessarily the most intelligent people who are the most successful, but rather the most adaptable ones. Since we literally cannot predict perfectly what the future holds, having rigid intelligence or just one memorized skill set is far less valuable than having the ability to constantly learn, experiment, and pivot when you need to.
So how do you future-proof yourself right now? First, maximize your ability to use AI tools as a partner, not an enemy. Embrace it. Next, lean into unique human traits like deep emotion and intuition, things that AI currently lacks. You also need to deeply understand your inherent nature, meaning your personality and your tolerance for risk. And lastly, make your work and your passion the exact same thing. But please, don't forget the money part. You have to find something that allows you to sell your time for good money by combining your natural human passions with these cutting-edge technological tools.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought. In a world where the mind is increasingly automated, how will you adapt your unique human nature to remain invaluable? Because as the big cycle turns and technology keeps advancing at breakneck speed, your greatest asset isn't your current job title, it's your capacity to evolve. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay adaptable, and we'll see you next time.